shortly before the Diet meets next week to decide Japan's next prime minister, which some expect to be a hung parliament. His party has already contacted the Japan Innovation Party to request support for his candidacy to become prime minister again on November 11th. Depending on those opposition parties' willingness to work together, we may see our guest return as leader of Japan for the first time since 2012, or see the Liberal Democratic Party's Shigeru Ishiba remain head of state. It's going to be a numbers game with plenty of horse trading, likely. The opposition Democratic Party for the People said it would vote for its leader, Yuichiro Tamaki, who will be with us tomorrow, while the JCP says it will support Mr. Noda. The LDP and coalition partner Komeito are expected to vote for Ishiba. Our guest took over leadership of his own party only in September, but the election allowed CDPJ to gain 50 seats. Some critics say that result was not support for the party and its policies, but rather a vote of exhaustion with the LDP. Noda-san says, though, that despite the gains, it's not time for acting triumphant. Our guest vowed last Friday to unite the opposition and met with the head of the DPFP on Tuesday. Key issues do remain, such as energy policy, defense, and the Constitution, and the wall of 1.3 million yen, the income threshold for paying social insurance premiums. Will fall 2024 see our 67-year-old guest from Chiba's number 14 district have a comeback story for the ages? Well, the Yokohama Bay Stars had one. Let's hear his outlook. With no further ado, President Yoshihiko Noda.
皆さんおはようございます。今日はこのような機会を頂戴いたしまして心から感謝申し上げたいと思います。9月23日に立憲民主党の代表となりました野田佳彦と申します。かつて2011年から12年にかけて1年4ヶ月内閣総理大臣を務めたことがあります。
Good morning, everybody. I'm sincerely thankful for the opportunity to speak here today. As introduced, I became the president of the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan on September 23. My name is Noda Yoshihiko. I also was the prime minister of Japan for 1 year and 4 months between the periods of 2011 until 12.
今年は選挙イヤーであって、昨日はアメリカの新しい大統領が選ばれました。この件については後でご質問があればお答えをしていきたいというふうに思います。日本も選挙がございました。結果はご案内の通りでございますけれども、この選挙の少し総括的なお話をさせていただいて、まもなく始まる特別国会にどのように臨むのか、そしてこれからの参議院選挙にどう臨むのか、今日はそういうお話を中心にしていきたいと思います。
This year is, of course, an election year. Yesterday, we had the selection of the new president in the United States. I will speak more on this issue in the Q&A if there are any relevant questions to that. Japan, of course, also had an election this year. The results of this, as were introduced by the introduction already. I would like to speak a little bit about the general overview reflection of this recent election here in Japan. Also, how we are looking towards the special session of the Diet, which is soon to be taking place, and also towards the future House of Councillors election as well.
少し振り返りながら申し上げたいと思いますけれども、10月1日に臨時国会が開催をされて、その時に石破総理が誕生をいたしました。この臨時国会では、私は予想をしていたのは、1月と9月と大きな災害が発生をした能登半島の復旧・復興のための議論をするということと、それから1月から6月に行われた通常国会で、裏金の問題について解明もされていないし、けじめもついていないし、これからどうするかという法改正も不十分でしたので、その議論をもう一回きちっとやるんだろうと予想をしていました。
So first of all, to reflect somewhat about the steps leading up to this time. On October the 1st, there was the extraordinary session of the Diet held, which gave birth to Mr. Ishiba as the Prime Minister of Japan. At this session of the Diet, I had been anticipating that the main topics of discussion would be, first of all, looking at the Noto Peninsula, which was severely impacted by disasters in both January and September of this year. to have their discussion about the recovery process for the Noto Peninsula. Also, for the second issue, looking at the political slush funds discussion or the situation which had been taking place between January to June in the regular Diet session this year. However, not having full investigation into the actual facts of this situation or a resolution being put in place for this as well, because the legislation in regards to this was also, as we saw, insufficient. So I had been anticipating that there would be thorough discussion and debate on these two particular issues in this extraordinary session of the Diet.
はい。ところが、10月1日に臨時国会が始まり、9日に衆議院を解散をするということで、戦後、総理が就任してから最短の期間で解散総選挙になってしまいました。そこで私は、今回の解散は、裏金隠し解散だと命名をいたしました。
And however, after this session, of course, began on October 1st, it was then announced that the Diet would be dissolved on October 9. This was the shortest ever period before a dissolution and a general election was held in the post-war era of Japan. And given this very short period and the fact that it was called on in such a way, I called this the election in order to hide the slush fund scandal.
なぜこの問題を争点化したかと言いますと、これは単なる政治資金規正法という法律違反を85名の衆参の国会議員が行ったというだけにとどまらず、これはこれで大きな問題です。立法府国会というのは法律を作るところですから、法律を作るところでルール違反をした人が85人もいたということは大きな問題なんですが、それ以上にきちっと政治資金として使ったと説明ができないならば、これは雑所得として計算をされて、所得税法違反の可能性が出てくるということで、国民から税金を集めて、税金の使い道を決める国会で、その脱税の疑いのある人たちが85人以上もいるということは、これは国民が許してはいけないし、忘れてはいけないと思ったからであります。
And why it is that I thought this political funding, the slush fund situation, should be such a focus. There is, of course, the significant issue of the fact that there were at least 80 people within the Diet who were breaking the law in regards to political funding as well. Of course, this breaking the law in regards to that is something of great significance, of importance. The Diet is the place where Japan's laws are created. So the fact that there are more than 80 people who are then breaking those laws in such a situation is, of course, a significant problem. However, not only this, if we see that the funds which came up as part of this cannot be explained as being used for their dedicated political purposes, as said, then this can also be a potential violation of income tax law in Japan as well. So the people in the Diet, who are those responsible for deciding how to put the taxes of the people to use, if they are then actually breaking this law in regards to income taxation, and there are more than 80 people doing this, this is, of course, something which the public cannot forgive and cannot forget.
この争点化が功を奏したと思うんですけれども、石破総理、そして自民党には、その対応について焦りが出て、次々と摘出があったというふうに思います。その一つは、裏金に関わった議員については、非公認とするという人たちを何人か選んだ。でもその基準が曖昧であったこと、非公認とされた人たちにも事実上の公認料として2000万円のお金が、支給されていたことなど、説明のつかないある種ミスジャッジのようなことが続いたということが総選挙の結果に大きく影響を及ぼしたと思います。
And I believe that looking at this issue, Mr. Ishiba as Prime Minister and also the Liberal Democratic Party itself, in their response to how to deal with this political fund slush fund issue, were perhaps rushed and therefore made some missteps, misjudgments as part of this process as well. For example, looking at some of those politicians who were embroiled in the slush fund scandal were not being recognized as official candidates for the LDP. However, the line for which candidates would be actually official official LDP candidates and those which were not on the LDP list was rather ambiguous. Following this also, there was also the issue of some of the candidates who were not on the LDP's list being given their headquarters or their offices being given 20 million yen in funding before the election as well, without any kind of explanation being able to be provided thoroughly for that. I believe that this was a misjudgment on the part of the Prime Minister and the LDP, and this had a significant impact on the results of the election.
衆議院の定数は465人ですので、過半数、半分以上というのは233なんですね。で、私どもは自民党の過半数割れは、これは実現できるだろうと思っていましたけれども、選挙に入っていくと、自民党の過半数割れのみならず、自民党と公明党を合わせた与党が過半数割れにしていくという可能性がだんだん出てきたことを実感として持つようになりました。結果的には摘出が一番大きかったと思いますけれども、政治とカネ問題をめぐって、やっぱり自民党、公明党政権に国民はノーという意思表示を突きつけて、結果的には自公合わせて215議席となりました。
And so the number of seats in the House of Representatives in Japan is 465, therefore making a majority would be 233 seats. We felt that it would be realistic for us to be able to break through the majority of the LDP prior to the election. However, coming into the election, it started to become clear that there was, or we felt very much that there was indeed a potential not only for breaking the majority of the LDP, but also for the breaking the majority of the coalition of the LDP together with Komeito as well. I think that this resulted largely from misjudgments on their part and also issues in relation to the political funding and scandals as well. But this was really a signal from the people saying no to the LDP and Komeito. And as a result, the LDP was then only able to reach, or the LDP and Komeito together only able to reach 215 seats.
過半数割れに追い込んだということは、これは選挙の目標にしていたので、それを達成できたということは大きな前進だと思っています。一方でもう一つの目標は、比較第一党になるということでありました。でこれは我々は50議席増やすことができましたけれども、結果的には自民党が191議席、立憲民主党が148議席と、第2党でありましたので、過半数割れに追い込むという必要条件は満たしましたけれども、必要十分条件までは残念ながら満たすことができなかったというのが総括であります。
And so also looking at the overall results of the election, one of our primary goals had been to break the majority of the LDP. The fact that we were able to realize this was indeed a significant step forward, progress in regards to that. However, another was also looking at how to become the second largest and as the largest opposition party as well. We were able to increase 50 seats in the result of the election, which was indeed a very significant step forward. However, looking at the difference in the numbers there as well, we could see there was 91 for the LDP and 48 for the CDP, making us the second party. However, in regards to this, we can see that while we were able to reach the necessary conditions to break the majority of the LDP, it was not necessarily sufficient in able to become the second largest the power within the parliament.
はい、ということですので、11日月曜日から、特別国会が始まります。できればこれは特別国会についてはしっかり会期を取ってもらって審議の時間も充実をさせてもらいながら、国民の意思が政治と金の問題についてはノーという意思表示をしたわけですので、その解明を引き続きやっていくことと、こうした不祥事を起こさないためにどのような処方箋を描くのかというところまでの議論を本来はすべきだというふうに思います。
And so on Monday, the 11th of November, is when the special session of the Diet will be beginning. Ideally, it should be the case that there would be sufficient period within this special session in which there can be thorough discussions on the situation which has led the people to say no to the LDP and their politics in regards to the political slush funds situation, to also investigate the actual situation of this scandal and also have the measures in place place? What kind of measures are needed to prevent this kind of thing happening in the future? There should be sufficient time for such discussions.
その特別国会の冒頭に、主犯指名選挙、総理大臣を選ぶ選挙が行われます。これは1回目の投票はそれぞれの政党の党首を皆さん書くだろうと思います。そうすると、一番多いのが衆議院ではやっぱり石破さん、2番目には立憲民主党の私になる可能性があります。過半数に達しない場合は、これはもう1回投票ということになって、この2回目の投票のときに、2人選べた中でどっちを選ぶかという決選投票になります。で、この決選投票で、私、野田佳彦と名前を書いていただける可能性もありますので、まだ政権交代の可能性はあるということだけはまだ申し上げておきたいと思います。
And so at the beginning of this special session, which is to begin on Monday, there will be a vote to elect the Prime Minister. Within this, in the first round of voting, it is likely that, of course, each will write the head of their own political party. When we look at this within the House of Representatives, the largest number there is then Mr. Ishiba of the LDP, and the second would be me as president of the CDP. However, if neither of these is able to have a majority in this first election, it will then go to one more round of voting. And there is the question of which of the two names people will be choosing at that second round of the runoff election at that time. And because there is, of course, still a chance that people would be writing my name at that time, I would like to say this does mean that we do still have a possibility of a change in government.
可能性がある限りは、その追求をしていきたいというふうに思いますけれども、今、どういうことをやっているかというと、各野党の党首と会談をして、今日も社民党の党首とお会いをいたしますけれども、これまで、維新、共産、国民、社民党と、今日4つ目の党首会談をやりますが、そこで、ある意味、今回の特別国会の持ち方もあるんですけれども、大事なのは来年の参議院選挙であって、この参議院選挙できちっと野党連携ができうるならば、参議院選挙で自民党に引導を出すことが十分できると思います。特に1人区、32ある1人区で協力し合えれば劇的な変化が起こせますので、そのキックオフという意味において、今、野党間の党首会談を精力的に行っているところであります。
And so as long as this possibility exists, this is, of course, something that we want and will continue to be pursuing. Therefore, at the moment, we are conducting talks with the heads of each of the opposition parties. Later today, I will be meeting with the head of the Social Democratic Party as well. Until now, have also met with the heads of Ishin, the Communist Party, and the DPPJ, and then the SDP today as well. This is, of course, looking towards next week's special session. However, what is important is also looking towards next year's House of Councillors election as well, and looking at how to have cooperation between the different opposition parties towards next year's election, particularly in those electorates of which there are 32, where there is just one person to be elected from each of these. If we can have full cooperation between each of the opposition parties in terms of putting the candidates up and within the election process next year, this could lead to a dramatic change in the situation in putting of the LDP, and so I see these meetings in a sense as a kickoff towards that as well.
その参議院選挙に入っていく前の重要なプロセスとして、先ほど申し上げた通り、今回の衆議院選挙では、裏金の問題、政治と金の問題に対して、国民はノーという意思表示を突きつけたわけですので、じゃあ、そのために、どうやったらこうした不祥事が起こらないかという、政治資金規正法の抜本的な改正案というのを、野党としてまとめて、それを自民党、公明党に飲むように迫る構図に持っていきたいというふうに思います。
And so as an important process towards next year's House of Council election there as well, we saw in the recent election there was clearly a message from the people saying no to the situation of the slush funds, the scandal, and the politics and money scandal as well. Therefore, having a thorough and fundamental amendment or revision of the relevant political funding control law in regards to this is one way to look at how to prevent such scandals in the future. So having all of the opposition parties being able to coordinate towards this and to push, therefore, the LDP into making these changes is a priority at the moment.
内外ともに大きな課題がいっぱいあるときですので、それらを解決するための政策を推進していくためには、どうしてもまず前提条件として、政治に対する信頼が不可欠であります。その信頼を取り戻すために、不祥事を起こさないための法改正、これを年内で決着をぜひつけていきたいというふうに思います。
This is a period in which we face many challenges, both domestically and outside, externally as well. In order to be able to resolve each of these issues and to promote policies which can do so, what is important and is absolutely vital is regaining trust in politics from the people as well. In order to do this, it is necessary to put in place the legislation which will prevent such kinds of scandals from occurring in the future. And we aim to have this finalized within this year.
中身としては、企業団体献金を廃止をして、個人献金を助長していくような流れを作っていくこと、それからやはり不正の温床になっていた政治資金パーティーについては、企業団体からのパーティー券の購入ということはもう求めないようにすること、あるいは政策活動費についてはこれ廃止をすること、第三者機関を作って政治資金の流れをきちっとチェックすることなどなど、あるいは我々が年来から主張している、日本の場合は独特なんですけれども、世襲が多いんで、こういうものについても政治資金を通じて制限をすることなどを柱として野党への呼びかけをしていきたいと考えています。
And so as to the contents of the kind of legislation and revision which is required in order to this, one would be to put limits on prohibitions on corporate or donations from particular organizations and so on, and instead to extend political donations from personal or from individuals. Also to look at the situation of funding for political parties, which has been a hotbed for this scandal situation as well. To not seek, for example, purchase of these party tickets from corporations or organizations as well. To look at what kind of also third-party body could be put in place to provide kind of monitoring or provide a check in regards to these funding. These other different steps are things which would be looked at as part of this as well. In the case of Japan, there is also the quite particular situation of having many hereditary politicians, second generation or even more politicians as well. So looking at the limits which would be put then on funding in these kind of cases as well. These are some of the various elements that we hope to coordinate with the other opposition parties in regards.
その前に具体的に政治の風景として変わってくるところがあると思います。それは今回の特別国会の入り方のところからなんですけれども、これはまだ自民党が十分意識してないと思います。野党の方が数が多いということは、国会運営、国会の人事については野党が主導権を握るということです。具体的に言うと、例えば各委員会の委員長であるとか、場合によっては議長、副議長を含めて多数決で決めれば野党が取れるようになるということ、この辺の意識がまだ十分自民党にはないようですので、その現実をまず突きつけていきたいというふうに思います。
And looking at concrete changes in the current political landscape at the period as we're entering this upcoming special diet situation as well. One aspect which I believe the LDP is perhaps not sufficiently recognizing or is not actually understanding enough is also looking at the possibility for the opposition to have the deciding role, deciding factors in regards to actual operations management and personnel within the diet as well. For example, looking at the opposition taking on the roles of heads of various committees within the parliament, even the speaker role, for example. If these are to be decided by a majority vote, then there is a significant chance that then opposition may take some of these roles within the committees and within the parliament itself, which is something that I think the LDP is not at the moment sufficiently acknowledging or recognizing. So we are going to be then also pushing this forward.
例えば30年前に1993年、私は衆議院議員の1年生になった時でありますけれども、この時は政権交代が起こって、何が起こったかというと、議長が比較第一党の自民党ではなくて、比較第二党の社会党の土井孝子さんが議長になりました。
And so, to give an example, 30 years ago in 1993, which was my first year as a Diet member in the House of Representatives, there was a change in government. And what happened then actually was that the speaker was not someone from the LDP, but was from the opposition party, Ms. Doi Takako, from the Social Party at the time.
そこまで議長を取るところまではいくかは別としても、衆議院は例えば文教委員会とか予算委員会とか、安保委員会とか常任委員会は17ありますけれども、その配分をドント方式で決めようという提案をしています。
And so whether, of course, we would take on, or the opposition would take on the role of speaker is one question. However, looking at the different important roles as heads of committees within the House, there is, for example, the Budget Committee, Security Committee, and so on. There are 17 such committees there as well. And so we're making a proposal in regards to how to distribute, or decision in regards to who will head up each of these.
その時に例えば議運委員長という本会議のセットをする大事な委員会の長であるとか、予算委員会というこれまた重要な委員会の長を野党が取ればどういうことになるかです。
And so this is, for example, if we look at who will be taking up the chair of the committee, which is responsible for actually setting the parliament itself, which is a very important role. Also, the budget committee, for example, these very significant roles within. What would happen then if someone from the opposition takes on that role?
特定の政党と先立って補正予算の中身の議論をして詰めてきても、予算委員長が差配をする中で、きちっと野党全体と向き合っていかないと予算も通らなくなります。
This means, for example, even if within one political party there is decisions or movements within the party to make their budget proposal and so on, once it goes into that committee, if the committee is then being headed by someone from the opposition, that budget cannot be passed unless it has that full coordination and understanding from the opposition parties as well.
おそらくまだ自民党はこういう国会の動きについての危機感が足りないように思います。すなわち、特定の政党と政策協議をして過半数を取れるようにということしか考えていない。国会の舞台回しをどうするのかについて念頭にまだなかったように思いますので、その期間をやはりこれからは持ってもらわなければいけないなと思います。
And I believe that the LDP is perhaps not having a sense of urgency or really understanding, looking at facing up to this situation of how they may need to be then operating, coordinating the Diet under such a potential circumstance as well. They are just looking at their discussions in terms of how to gain a majority or within discussions with specific parties at the moment, but not actually looking at how to manage the Diet within this kind of situation as well. So therefore, this is something that we're also calling or raising to make sure that they are indeed looking at this situation.
ここからもう時間が限られていますから、ここからが大事なんですが、でも私は国会の審議を停滞させて分断をさせることを目的とはしていません。
So there's limited time, but what I would like to say next is one of the very important points. It is not that we are looking to create any kind of division within the Diet, which would then bring things to a standstill.
分断は世界にとっても大きな問題ですけど、日本もその分断の政治ではいけないと思っています。
Division is, of course, a significant problem all around the world, but here in Japan also, I believe we must avoid any kind of political divisions.
与野党がきちっと議論をして一致点を見出していくための国会改革を私はやっていくチャンスと受け止めていきたいと思います。
I would like to take this now as a chance for reform of the Diet to find ways that we can find points of commonality between the ruling and opposition parties.
与党が事前に審査をした法律だけを出してきて、あとは機械的に物事が決まっていく国会じゃなくて、与野党が本当に大事なテーマに向き合って議論をして、場合によっては議員立法もどんどん議論をして修正して国民の意見が反映される、そういう法律や予算を作っていけるような、そういう契機にしていきたいと思います。
Rather than having laws which are only discussed within the ruling party and then which are just decided upon like clockwork, like machinery, rather than this, to have things which are discussed thoroughly within both the ruling and opposition party, to have sufficient debate on these important themes, to look at what kind of legislation to be put forward even from Diet members themselves, how this is to be revised, how the public opinion should be fully reflected within this as well. In both law, legislation and budget, this is a great opportunity to do so.
物事が見えないところで大事なことが裏で決まったり、内々に決まったりする日本の政治を変えて、国会という表舞台でしっかり議論して、きちっと物事が決まっていく、裏から表へと、熟議と公開の政治に変えていく、そういうチャンスにぜひしていきたいと考えています。
Rather than the traditions of Japanese politics where things are decided behind the curtains, just inside the party, just within what is happening, rather than this, to have it in the open space that is the Diet, where the people can see and where this is done in an open way. Changing this from the behind to the public to out in the open, I think is important as we are going forward.
ちょうど30分になりましたので、お約束は守りたいと思います。終わります。
I think I've managed to keep to time. We've just reached 30 minutes, so I will end here.
Thank you very much, Noda-san. Joining us at the table doing translation today is Mary Joyce. We greatly appreciate her contribution today. I did not say it at the beginning, but if you have a mobile phone, please turn it off or put it on manner mode. We will now go to the Q&A session. We will start with our working press. A reminder that we are live streaming on YouTube. We are getting questions from that audience as well. We have a couple already. This event will be archived. If you want to watch later, it will be on the FCCJ YouTube channel. Anthony, please.
では早速質疑応答の方に入りたいと思います。会場からそしてオンラインの方からも質問が届いております。本日の会見もアーカイブされます YouTube にて。
Anthony Rowley, South China Morning Post. Mr. Former Prime Minister, welcome to the FCCJ. Given the tremendous political uncertainty in Japan at the moment and the momentous developments in the outside world, how do you react to the idea of a government of national unity of Japan, i.e. all the parties joining together in one grand coalition? Do you think it's possible, and how do you feel personally about that idea?
はい、アントニー・ラウリーと申します。サウスチャイナモーニングポストの記者です。本日は本当にありがとうございます。日本での今政治的な不安定な状況、そして世界的にもそのような状況が見られるんですけれども、その中で例えば日本の今後の政権は大きな連立政権を作るすべての政党が一緒になって一つのユニティというようなものを連立政権として作るというような考え方はどういうふうに思いますでしょうか。すべての政党が一緒になって一つを作るというような提案についてのコメントです。
いわゆる挙国一致内閣みたいなものですね。私はそれは例えば東日本大震災13年前に発災をしましたけれども、そういう大きな災害があったときに与党や野党ではなくて全体でという機運が一回ありました。そういうことではない限りはね、例えば今回は政治とお金の問題をめぐって自民公明にはノーという意思表示が出たわけですから、そこと一緒になっていくという何か契機があるかというとそうではなくて、むしろ違う政権を作っていこうということの方が大事ではないかと思います。大きな災害とかパンデミックとかですね、全体がやっぱり急いで物事を決めていかなければいけない、与党野党関係なくという事態があるならばおっしゃったご提案はあり得るとは思いますが、現時点ではそうではないというふうに思います。
I think such a sort of a grand coalition, national unity coalition, is something, for example, in the case of following a significant, a severe national disaster, as we had the experience 13 years ago following the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, for example. At a moment like that, there is perhaps a momentum and environment which could lead to or could require this kind of grand unity between different parties, where it does not matter whether you are the ruling or the opposition party when there are such urgent questions at hand. However, in the situation we are now, where it is the issue that the people have said no to the LDP and Komeito because of the political funding scandal, I don't believe that we are necessarily in this kind of situation where it calls for this sort of unity among the parties. There is not this kind of momentum. What is more important is to create a different and alternate government following the response of the people saying no to that. So in the case of following a significant and severe national disaster or pandemic where all parties need to work urgently to make decisions together, that kind of formation may be something to consider. However, I do not believe that that is the situation we have today.
Richard.
Richard Lloyd Parry of The Times. Thank you for talking to us this morning. What consequences do you think the election of Donald Trump will have for Japan? And if you were Prime Minister, and if Donald Trump, as he might, demanded that Japan pay more for the stationing of US troops in Japan, how would you respond? That was my first question. And then the second quick question, I mean, Japan is unique among the rich democracies in that for almost all of the past 70 years, it's been governed by just one political party. Now, the opposition has done unusually well in this election, but looking back historically and taking the broad view, why have opposition parties like yours found it so difficult to dislodge the LDP?
タイムズ紙のリチャード・ロイド・パリと申します。本日ありがとうございます。2点ほど質問がございます。まず1つ目はアメリカの大統領選で、トランプ氏が選ばれたことは日本にとってどのような今後の影響、結果などがあるのか。そしてもし総理大臣になられたとしたら、もしトランプ氏が今後も予想される日本政府にそのアメリカ軍の駐留に対してもっと予算を出してほしいということを日本政府にもしトランプ氏が言ってきたらどのような、総理大臣だったらどのような反応を取るのかということがまず1つ目の質問です。そして2つ目の方が、日本はその豊かな民主主義国家の中で非常にユニークなこととして、約70年間もずっとほとんど一つの政党がずっと政権を握っているという特徴、歴史的な状況があると思います。今回の選挙ではその野党が非常にいい結果を出したということが言えると思うんですけれども、歴史的な観点から言いますと、日本の中でその自民党じゃない野党が政権を取ることがなぜこれほど難しいというふうに思われますでしょうか。
まず前半のところでありますけれども、11日に特別国会で石破さんが指名されるか、可能性は私もゼロではないと思っていますが、私が選ばれるか、新しい日本の首脳はまずとにかく個人的な信頼関係を早くトランプ新大統領と結ぶべきだというふうに思っております。でなぜそういうことを申し上げるかというと、米国第一主義を掲げていることによって、国際社会へのコミットをどんどんと引いていく可能性が非常にあるというところは心配なんですね。でかつて、私が総理をやっていたときに EAS という東アジアと東南アジアの首脳会議がありました。でその時に私の時は当時のカウンターパートのオバマ大統領に出席をしてもらいました。とても東南アジア諸国喜んでくれたんです。でところがその後トランプさんは全然来なくなってしまった。みんながっかりしてました。バイデンさんは最初来たけどその後2年間来なくなってしまったので、改めてやっぱり特に緊迫する安保環境があるこのアジアにコミットしてもらうように、やっぱりトランプさんに出てもらうようなことをね、やっぱり日本はもっと進めて指導していかなければいけないというふうにまず思っていると思います。
In regards to the first question, the special diet session will be held on the 11th, of course. Well, I think that my own becoming prime minister there, this possibility is not zero, but if it is also Mr. Ishiba who becomes the prime minister then as well, either way, what will be important is for the new prime minister of the next prime minister of Japan to build a personal relationship of trust with Mr. Trump as the first step. The reason for this is if we look at the policy which he is putting forward of American America first, we have great concerns that this could mean stepping back on the commitment to the international community with such a situation as well. If I look back to the time when I was Prime Minister of Japan, we have the East Asian Summit. At the time, my counterpart in the United States was President Obama. When he attended the EAS, particularly the Southeast Asian countries and their heads of state were very happy that he did attend in this. However, when Mr. Trump became president, he did not attend at all, which was something very disappointing for these countries. When Mr. Biden became president, he did attend at first. However, following this for 2 years, he did not attend the summit at all, particularly in a part of the world such as Asia, where the security environment is in such a tense situation. Having this kind of commitment to Asia is something very important. And I believe that Japan should play a role in promoting and taking the leadership to encourage Mr. Trump to participate.
はい、その上でご質問の例えば日本に対してより防衛費の負担、基地負担、要求があるかどうかまだ分かりませんけれども、そういう場合には思いやり予算を含めて、日本はこれまで相応の対応をしているということは、しっかり説明をする上に、例えば日米地位協定の問題も含めて、こちらからも要求しなければいけないことについては、主張をしていく、そういう関係にしたいというふうに思います。それから70年もずっと、自民党が、ある意味、ずっと政権を握り続けてきた。で十数年に1回しかでもチャンスがないんですね、政権交代。さっき言った93年と2009年と2回政権取ったことがあります。で今回十数年ぶりにチャンスが来たけど取りきれなかったんですが、次の参議院選挙も含めて場合によっては衆参ダブル選挙になるかもしれませんので、まさに今政権交代前夜だと思います。やっぱり与野党が緊張感があって、その時に初めてやっぱり国民全体の声が国会に反映できると思いますので、緊張感のある政治を実現できるように頑張っていきたいというふうに思いますし、十数年ぶりのチャンスだと思っています。
So in regards to this, well, of course, it is not clear whether he will, what kind of specific demands he might make on Japan in regards to defense or the base budget as well. By building up this opportunity for him, attending these summits, for having this sense, this relationship would be an opportunity, therefore, for Japan to state its case more in regards to this as well. In regards to, for example, the Japan's, the consideration budget for the bases as well, but also not only to explain our situation in response to, or our position in response to those demands, also to make the statements or requests from the side of Japan as well. For example, in regards to also to the U.S.-Japan status of forces agreement, things that Japan would need to say to the United States. This is the kind of relationship that would be built up by this as well. As to the second question, the situation that Japan has basically been governed by the same party, the LDP, for the majority of the past 70 years, I think that this chance for a change in government is something that only comes up, less often than once a decade. We had the changes of government in 1993, then 2009, for example, as well. And so now it's, 10 plus years since this last change as well. While we were not able to realize to have success in an actual change of government in this recent this past election, however, when we see the House of Council election coming up next year, and even the possibility of there being a double House election coming up as well, I believe that this is a chance which does still exist. Therefore, what is important for that is to make sure that we keep this kind of relationship of almost of tension between the ruling and opposition parties as well. So there is this critical sense of urgency within the relations. This is where we're going to be continuing to make our efforts, and that is the way to ensure that the people's will can then be reflected within politics. So I believe that this is still a chance that only comes more than every 10 plus years that we are still holding now.
Our next question will come from online. Eric Johnston of the Japan Times has sent in a question, and he spoke here recently, didn't say it that day, but apparently Nippon Ishin leader Nobuyuki Baba has announced he will not stand for re-election of his party. What does it mean for your efforts ahead of Monday or in the future to cooperate with the party?
次、オンラインの方で届いている質問で、ジャパンタイムズのエリック・ジョンソン記者からの質問です。選挙の直前にもこちらの方でも会見をされたんですけれども、維新の会の馬場伸幸氏が今後、その党首としてまた立たないというふうに発言をされているというようなことがあるんですけれども、そのようなことが今後、月曜日に向けて、そしてその後の維新の会との協力、連携などにどのような意味を持つのでしょうか。
先週の段階で馬場代表とは党首会談を開きまして、でその時は私の考えている政治改革やあるいは国会改革のイメージについてお話をさせていただいて、関心を持っていただいたんですよね。ですから今週できればお会いをして、さっき申し上げたような具体的な政治改革のプラン、あるいは国会改革のプランを提示して、さらなる協力の呼びかけをしようと思っていたんですけれども、ちょっと今、党内的には大変な状況なので、そういう党首会談をセットできる環境ではなくなってしまったことが残念ではあります。ただ紙としてね、こういうことを考えていますということを私のプランというのを維新の皆さんにはご提示をして、さらなる検討をお願いをしていきたいというふうに思います。他党に関わることなので、これ以上コメントはしにくいんですけれども、考え方の整理をした上で、さらなる提示をしていきたいとは思っています。
At the time when I met last with Mr. Baba last week, I presented to him my image of the kind of political reform and diet reform that we have in mind, and he did indicate interest in regards to this. However, this week I had hoped for an opportunity to meet with him once again and put forward more concrete our plans for reform and so on, and call for this further cooperation with his party. However, it seems that because of the challenging circumstances or situation inside the party, inside Ishin at the moment, it is not, unfortunately, possible to have this kind of meeting with other party heads at the moment, which is something unfortunate. However, while it will not be necessarily in an in-person meeting, I hope to organize our proposals plans on paper and to share this with him and also with the Ishin party members as well for their consideration. Because this is, of course, something to do with another party's internal situation, it's difficult to comment more than that, but we will still be putting forward our proposals and our thoughts for this reform and cooperation to them.
Yes, sir.
拓也西村、フリーランスジャーナリスト、Let me ask in Japanese。日本語で伺います。参議院選の前にですね、まだ衆議院がですね、特別国会開かれてない。代表おっしゃるように、誰が総理大臣なのかまだ分かんない状態で、やはり多数派形成が鍵になってくると思うんですけれども、代表は党首会談を重ねておりますが、これは多数派を作るために、政党同士の枠組みでの多数派を考えているのか、あるいは個別の議員に働きかけて協力を促す、いわゆる一本釣り、こういうことは頭にないのでしょうか。
My name is Nishimura, freelance. Of course, we have the House of Councils election upcoming and so on, but even before that as well, we still have the situation where it is not yet certain who will be the next Prime Minister of Japan, and looking at how to form a majority towards this is key at the moment. However, I would like to ask, within your different discussions, you're meeting with party heads at the moment, if you are only looking at creating this kind of majority through party-to-party coordination, this kind of cooperation, or if you are also considering approaching individual Diet members for their support and cooperation in regards to this as well.
現時点の取り組みはですね、臨時国会の時に石破政権に対して内閣不信任案を共同提出をした野党ということで、対象としてはだから維新、国民、共産、この3党で、今日お会いする社民党というのは同じ会派でしたので、共同行動をとっているということで、社民党も含めて党と党との関係の中で今検討していただいているという流れです。一方で、例えば有志の会のように個別に考えた無所属の人たち、これは個別にも働きかけをさせていただいていると、合わせて両方やっているような今状況であります。党の中のね、 個別の誰かにというやり方は今していません。いや、それはやっぱりね、政党間の疑心暗鬼を生んでは今良くないと思いますので、それは気をつけていかなければいけないと思います。
So within our current initiatives, what we are doing at the moment, you're particularly targeting those opposition parties who have the vote of no confidence in Mr. Ishiba's government there as well. So in the special diet session, so looking at targeting Ishin, the DPPJ, and the Communist Party as well. Within this also includes the SDP as well. So this is looking at consideration within the relationship, party-to-party relationship there as well. At the same time, there are also independent members who are part of sort of voluntary, independent groups of parliamentarians as well, who we are also speaking with. So it is this joint approach. However, then there was the follow-up question about whether there would be any approaching individuals within specific political parties, and that is not something I would pursue, because this is, of course, to do with the trust and relationships between each of the parties. So there's no intention to approach individuals within existing political parties.
Our next question comes from online, from Sang-hoon Lee of Donghae Ilbo. Mr. Noda, when you took over as Prime Minister, relations between Korea and Japan were not good. A lot has happened since between the nations, but relations have improved significantly since last year. Since you are aiming for Prime Minister, what is your thoughts on Korea-Japan relations ahead?
次もまたオンラインの質問で、韓国のドンアイルボ市のイ・サンフン記者からの質問です。以前ですね、総理大臣務められた時は日韓関係は、あまり良くない時代だったと思います。でそれ以降も日韓関係ではさまざまなことはもちろんたくさん起きたんですけれども、特にこの1年間でその関係が改善してきている、良くなってきているというような状況があると思います。今もう一度その総理大臣というポストを、目指している野田先生には、今の日韓関係についての考えをぜひ教えてください。
私の時はですね、日韓関係とても大事だと思ったんで、総理大臣に就任して最初の二国間関係の訪問はソウルだったんです。でそれはやっぱり法の支配であるとか民主主義であるとかというところの価値観を共有をしていて、大事な隣国でありますのでね、そこをしっかりと固めていくことが日本の外交のスタートだと思ったんです。で当時のイ・ミョンバク大統領とお会いをして、非常に1回目の会談うまくいきました。まずはそこまで。
First of all, at my time when I was Prime Minister, I believe that the Japan and Korea relations are extremely important. Therefore, my first international visit after becoming Prime Minister was to Seoul. This is, of course, sharing the same common values such as the rule of law and democracy. I see Korea as a very important neighbor. So solidifying, enhancing that relationship is very much one of the starting points for diplomacy for Japan. At that time, when I visited Seoul, then the president of Korea was Lee Myung-bak. At that time, our first meeting together went very well.
で非常に良かったと思ったのはですね、イ・ミョンバク大統領は韓米 FTA をやって国内では厳しい批判を浴びていたけれども、それは自分は間違っていないと自信を持っているとおっしゃっていた、そのなんか揺らぎのない信念というのに感銘をしましたし、私も TPP 交渉に向けて向けて協議しようと考えていた時なので、とても参考になったということと、これまでの日韓関係を振り返って、韓国の政権の支持率が下がると歴史カードを出して、そして支持率を上げようとしてきた繰り返しだったけど、私はそういうことはやらないと明確にお話をされた点で、素晴らしい大統領だなと思ったんです。
And what I was very much impressed with at that time, this was a time when there was the negotiations, or he was pushing forward with the Korea-US free trade agreement. Despite the fact that this was very much criticized domestically within Korea, he was not shaken at all in his belief and said that he was very confident in continuing to go forward in regards to this, despite this opposition. At the time, I was also looking towards the negotiations around the TPP as well. So I very much, his stance was very much a reference point for me in regards to that. There is also, if we reflect upon the longer relations between Korea and Japan, there is often a situation when domestic support levels for the government in Korea become low, they then bring out the history card as a way to increase their popularity there as well. However, President Lee said to me at that time very clearly that he would not do such a thing, which I thought he was a very impressive president therefore.
その2ヶ月後に日本に来ていただいて、シャトル外交でお会いしたときには、会談の9割がいわゆる慰安婦問題になったんで、2ヶ月前に言ったことと全然違うじゃないかというところから、残念ながら関係が冷え込みました。
However, 2 months later, when President Lee came to Japan as part of the shuttle diplomacy, the meeting that we had at that time, 90% of the meeting was actually focused on the so-called comfort women issue, therefore. So this was something which is completely different to what he had said 2 months previously to that. And it was from there that we saw a dramatic cooling of the relations.
その中で今、日韓関係というのは私は非常にいいと思っています。岸田前総理も頑張ったと思いますけど、それ以上に韓国のまさに首脳のある意味覚悟を決めた対応が日韓関係の改善につながったということは評価をしていますし、今北がウクライナに派兵をしたり、あるいはミサイル開発や核の開発もどんどん進めているときに、日韓の関係が安定的に良好であるということは素晴らしいことだと思っていますし、その関係性はこれからも続けなければいけないと思っています。
I believe I do also evaluate that the relations now between Japan and Korea are very good. I believe this has to do with the fact that former Prime Minister Kishida did make efforts in regards to this, but more than this, I think it is also, I very much highly praise or evaluate these steps of the Korean leaders in regards to really deciding to focus and to make these improvements there as well. When we have the situation today with North Korea sending troops to Ukraine, also the missile and nuclear developments as well, it is even more important that there is a stable and positive relationship between Korea and Japan. So seeing the significance or the importance of this relationship, I think, is something that we need to continue to focus on or strengthen as we go forward.
Karen?
こんにちは。今日はありがとうございます。ラジオフランスの特派員で西村と申します。よろしくお願いします。日本での選挙の投票率は非常に低いです。つまり多くの日本人にとっては投票してもしなくてもいいんです。あまり政治のことに期待がなさそうです。立憲民主党は、特に若者女性とかの投票率を上げるために何か身近な政策を提案することができるのか、そういう期待に応えることができるのでしょうか。
My name is Nishimura of Radio France. In regards to Japanese elections, there is a very low rate of voting, rate of people participating in these elections. Many people feel that whether they vote or not is maybe irrelevant. Also, they do not necessarily have high expectations, high hopes towards elections or what impact they can have. I would like to ask in regards to the CDP if there are any particular policies related to people's daily life, for example, which you are looking at as a way to encourage particularly young people or women to vote, to take part in elections as well, and what your response to this very low voting rate is.
2点申し上げたいんですね。で、一つ、今回、思ったより投票率が高くなかったということは、9日に解散して27日投開票というわずか18日間です。で、私が総理の時解散した時、総務省に聞いたら、周知徹底するには1ヶ月必要だと言われてました。18日間じゃ短すぎて、しかも期日前投票するには投票権がいると思ってる人がいっぱいいたんですよ。最終週にね届いたっていうところも多いし、多分在外投票なんかほとんどできてないんじゃないでしょうか。という意味では今回のやり方は民主主義の精神に戻ると、もっと多くの人に投票参加してもらおうという時間が足りなかったということは問題だと思っています。その上で本質的なテーマで我々が若者政策が持っているかどうかって、コンテンツはいっぱいあるんですよ。民主党の頃からネキストジェネレーション、ネキストエレクションよりもネキストジェネレーションということを言ってた財政の問題も含めて、将来の世代から搾取するんじゃなくて将来世代に投資をするという、例えば教育の無償化とか一貫してコンテンツでは言ってきているつもりなんですけれども、 メッセージの発信の仕方が例えば国民民主党のように上手ではなかったという反省点はあると思いますので、メッセージの発信の仕方はもっともっと工夫をしていきたいと思います。
I have 2 points I would like to share in response to that. First of all, looking at the fact that the number or the voting rate was perhaps lower than we had hoped or expected in this recent election, I think that a significant factor there is that the dissolution was only called on the 9th and then the election was held on the 27th, meaning only 18 days between this. At the time when I was Prime Minister, when I was speaking to the Minister in regards to the amount of time required to sufficiently inform people and prepare for an election, I indicated that 1 month was what would be necessary to have that thorough process. However, in this case, there was only 18 days, which has to be said to be too short. This means, for example, for people wanting to vote prior to the day, for example, the process required to do even the paperwork to have that sent out and so on was insufficient. It arrived maybe in just the last days, the last week of this. And also, for example, for many overseas voters, people voting from outside of Japan, many of them probably were not able to because of this very short period. So I think that this method of doing this in such a short span of time, from the perspective of the spirit of democracy in regards to having the most people able to participate in the voting as well, it was very problematic in regards to this. As to the fundamental question about whether or what kind of youth policies the CDP has in regards to contents, we have plenty in regards to this, even policies which we have been consistently holding since the DPJ days as well. For example, not looking towards the next election, but rather to the next generation, including economic or financial policies in regards to this as well. This includes, for example, making education available freely, looking at, rather than exploitation of younger generations, investment in them as well. So I think the contents of the policy are very much there. However, our issue, or what we need to work to improve more, is that we are perhaps not so skilled at conveying that message to young people, for example, in comparison to the DPPJ, how to actually get this message out there, how to communicate this message of these contents of the policy is where we need more work.
Sir, we thank you very much for your time today. Considering on morning of September 23rd, you were running for party presidency, and now 49 days later, you may be head of state again. Today, you are the 4th former Prime Minister of Japan to speak at our organization. If you come back, should you win on Monday, you will be the first in 50 years. Thank you very much for your time.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
And we have all our guests get an honorary 1-year membership.
どうもありがとうござい
We
ます。
hope you use it soon.
ありがとうございます。失礼します。